The night Connor Hale nearly died, he heard everything. He heard the paramedics arguing about which hospital had a shorter wait. He heard his daughter-in-law whisper into her phone that she was on her way, that it didn't look good, that someone needed to call the attorney first thing in the morning. He heard his son, his own son, the one he had put through college and business school and set up with a corner office and a company car, say the words that would change everything. If he doesn't pull through, we need to be ready. Connor Hale was 61 years old. He had built Hale Precision Manufacturing from a two-room machine shop in Akron, Ohio, into a company with 400 employees and contracts with 3 of the largest aerospace firms in the country. He had shaken hands with governors. His name was on a wing of the Akron Children's Hospital. Forbes had called him a self-made titan of American industry, but none of that mattered now. He had collapsed during a client dinner at a steakhouse downtown. Sudden, catastrophic stroke. No warning. One moment he was cutting into a ribeye and making a joke about the Federal Reserve, and the next he was on the floor, the tablecloth pulled halfway down with him, candles and water glasses crashing all around. The doctors called it a severe ischemic stroke. They've told his family that the brain imaging showed significant disruption. They used words like limited prognosis and wait and see and prepare for multiple outcomes. What they did not know, what none of them knew, was that Connor heard every word. His mind was sharp, razor sharp. The same mind that had read 600 balance sheets and caught the one fraudulent line item in a mountain of numbers. The same mind that had memorized the names of his employees' children and asked after them by name at the company Christmas party. That mind was completely, furiously awake, but his body had locked him inside it like a room with no door. He could not speak. He could not open his eyes. He could not lift a finger. He lay in the bed listening to machines breathe for him, listening to nurses discuss their lunch orders, listening to the world move around him as though he were already furniture. The first visitors came the morning of the second day. Connor recognized the voice of his son, Derek Hale, before he even crossed the threshold. 41 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that photographs well and deceives easily. "The board is meeting Friday," Derek said to someone. His voice was low, controlled, the way it always was when he was calculating something. "Dad has voting shares. Without written authorization, we're stuck." "What about power of attorney?" A woman's voice. Vivian, Derek's wife. Connor had never fully trusted her, though he had never been able to say exactly why. "His attorney is already pulling the documents. If the neurologist signs off that he's non-responsive, we can move forward. Move forward." That was the phrase they used. Not get him help, not find the best doctors. Move forward, as if Connor were a problem on a spreadsheet rather than a man lying in a hospital bed hearing every syllable they spoke. There was a pause, and then Vivian said, quietly but not quietly enough, "The house in Scottsdale." "Did he ever update the deed?" Derek answered, and Connor stopped listening. Not because he couldn't hear, but because he needed a moment to process the fact that the boy he had taught to ride a bike on a Saturday morning in 1993 was now standing at his bedside planning the distribution of his estate. More visitors arrived through the day. Business associates, who had called him a friend for 20 years, showed up in expensive overcoats, stayed 12 minutes, and said things like, he'd want us to keep the company strong. His brother-in-law, a man he had helped bail out of a failed restaurant venture 3 times, stood in the corner of the room scrolling through his phone. Only his daughter, Phoebe, sat and held his hand without saying anything about money or meetings or moving forward. She was 34 and lived in Portland and had flown in overnight. She didn't know what to say, so she just held his hand, and Connor focused everything he had on trying to squeeze back. He couldn't. By the third evening, Connor Hale had begun to give up. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like a fire running out of oxygen, slowly, quietly going dark. He was trapped. His body was a vault. His family was dismantling his life in the hallways outside his room, and he was alone in a way that no amount of wealth or achievement had ever prepared him for. Then the door opened, and the whole room smelled like pine floor cleaner. The footsteps were different from all the others. Deliberate, unhurried. The sound of someone who had nowhere else to be and no performance to put on. "Evening, sir." The voice was a woman's. Middle-aged, Connor guessed from the steadiness of it. A slight Midwestern flatness, like she'd grown up somewhere near cornfields and water towers. I know you probably don't know I'm here. They told me you can't hear anything. But I always figure it doesn't hurt to say hello just the same. Connor heard the squeak of a mop bucket being set against the far wall. My name's Adele Birch. I work nights here on the third floor, going on 11 years now. Don't usually talk to patients, but I saw you when they brought you in and something just told me. She paused, as if deciding whether to go on. Something told me you were still in there. Connor felt something move through him, not physically. Nothing had moved physically in 3 days, but something shifted, some internal compass needle that had been spinning without direction suddenly found magnetic north. Adele Birch cleaned his room with the same quiet efficiency every night had. He could hear her wringing out the mop, hear the precise rhythm of her work, methodical, unhurried, the movement of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anybody. I lost my husband 2 years ago, she said, out of nowhere while she worked. He was in a room like this one, actually. Different floor. I used to come up on my breaks and just talk to him. The nurses thought I was a little strange about it. But he always said, when he was healthy, he always said, Adele, the worst thing in the world isn't dying, it's being in a room and not mattering to anyone in it. She wrung out the mop again. So I figured, even if you can't hear me, at least I can make sure you know somebody noticed you were here. Connor did not have tear ducts that worked. He could not cry. But if he could have, he would have. She came back the next night. And the night after that. By the fourth night, Connor had stopped listening for Derek's voice in the hallways and started listening for the sound of that mop bucket coming down the corridor. It had become the one sound in his world that didn't feel transactional. Adele talked while she cleaned. That was her way. She talked about her neighborhood on the east side of Akron where she'd lived for 30 years, the same street, the same house with the loose front step she kept meaning to fix. She talked about her daughter, Tanya, who was 13 and going through a phase of relentless eye rolling that Adele described with such deadpan affection that Connor almost smiled, or felt the ghost of a smile, which was the closest thing available to him. She asked me why I still go to church since Daddy died. Adele said one night, pulling a chair close to the bed the way she had started doing in the last 10 minutes of her shift when the mopping was done, and the room smelled clean and there was nothing left to do but sit. I told her I don't go for God, exactly. I go because it's the one place where somebody knows my name every single week, where I'm not just the night cleaning lady. I'm Miss Birch. I'm somebody's widow. I'm Tanya's mom. She was quiet for a moment. I'm seen. Connor thought about that word. Seen. He had been featured on the cover of a regional business magazine 3 times. His name was engraved on a plaque in the lobby of his own company. There were people who would recognize him from across a restaurant, and yet he could not remember the last time he had felt what Adele described. Not seen like a success. Seen like a person. On the 5th night, she brought Tanya. Connor heard them at the door, one set of footsteps, deliberate and measured, set quick and slightly reluctant in the way of teenagers who have been dragged somewhere against their will. Mom, why do we have to? Because I said. Keep your voice down. A long, suffering sigh, then the sound of both of them settling into the room. Mr. Hale, Adele said, I hope you don't mind. My neighbor couldn't watch her tonight. I told her to be respectful. I am being respectful, Tanya said. Then after a pause, in a completely different voice, softer, uncertain. Hi, I'm Tanya. My mom talks about you. Silence. She says you have nice hands. For someone in a hospital, I mean. Despite everything, the locked body, the humming machines, the son planning his estate in conference rooms 2 floors up, Connor felt something that might have been warmth. Mom says you built a big company, Tanya continued, apparently deciding to commit. She says you started with basically nothing. I have to do a project for school about entrepreneurs. Would it be okay if? She trailed off. I mean, you probably can't answer, but when you wake up, maybe you could. Adele said gently, He'll wake up, baby. How do you know? A pause. Because he's still fighting, I can tell. Tanya came closer. Connor could tell because the voice got louder, and then, unexpectedly, he felt the lightest pressure on the back of his hand. A teenager's fingers, tentative and warm. My dad was in a hospital too, she said. Her voice had gone careful and still the way young voices go when they're carrying weight they haven't learned to set down yet. I used to come and sit with him. I used to tell him about school and what songs I was listening to and dumb stuff that didn't matter, and I don't know if he heard me. She stopped, but I needed to say it anyway. So maybe you have people like that too. People who need to say things to you. Connor Hale had sat across the table from senators. He had given speeches to rooms of 600 people. He had eulogized his own father in front of a packed Methodist church without once losing his composure. But a 13-year-old girl had just unmade him completely. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Let him rest, okay." Then at the door, Tanya turned back. Connor could tell from the shift in her voice. "Mr. Hale, my mom comes every night, so you're not alone, okay? You have us." They left, and in the silence of the clean, pine-scented room, Connor Hale made a choice. He was not going to reveal that he was conscious. Not yet, not to Derek, not to Vivian, not to the attorney pulling documents on the 4th floor. He was going to stay hidden for one more reason. Because for the first time in as long as he could remember, he was learning something that all his money and all his success had never taught him. He was learning what he was worth to people who had nothing to gain from him. The answer from his boardroom was a lot. Meetings, decisions, capital allocation. He was worth an enormous amount to the people standing to inherit from him. The answer from Adele Birch's 11-year night shift was something different, something quieter. She kept coming. On the 6th night, she told him about the year her husband Raymond was sick. Not sick the way people are sick in movies, not peacefully, not with speeches. Actually sick. Tubes and machines and nights where she drove home at 5 in the morning and sat in the parking lot of a Kroger because she couldn't face going into an empty house. "Raymond wasn't a big man," she said. "I mean that in the best way. He was a school bus driver. Made $38,000 a year his whole career, never complained once. He drove the same route for 19 years and knew every kid's name and what grade they were in. When he passed, 47 of those kids showed up to his funeral. 47, some of them were grown, had kids of their own." Her voice was soft with memory. "I thought this man never ran a company, never had his name on a building. But 47 people came to say goodbye because he made their mornings a little safer, a little kinder." She let the silence hold for a moment. "I always wondered what it would look like at the end. Who shows up, what they say." She didn't say what she was implying. She didn't need to. "I think the answer tells you everything about how you lived." Connor thought about who had shown up at his bedside. He thought about the attorneys pulling documents, the brother-in-law scrolling through his phone, Vivian asking about the Scottsdale property deed. And then he thought about Phoebe, who had flown in from Portland and held his hand without saying anything about money, and Adele Birch, who had mopped his floor and pulled up a chair and told him he mattered. Not because it helped her, not because she knew who he was, just because she was the kind of person who noticed when someone was alone in a room and decided to do something about it. The 7th morning brought lawyers. He could hear them down the hall before they even reached his door. The specific tread of expensive shoes on linoleum, the particular cadence of men who charged by the hour and had learned to speak quickly. "The neurologist has signed the non-responsiveness evaluation," one of them said. Derek's voice, "So we can proceed. With the filing, yes, and the company shares." A rustling of papers. "The voting trust reverts to the surviving family in the event of incapacitation, assuming the board votes to." The voices dropped and Connor lost the rest of it. But he had heard enough. He had a company. 400 people who came to work every morning because Hale Precision paid their bills and kept their families going. He had spent 30 years building something real, something that mattered, and he had spent the last 7 days discovering that the people closest to him saw it only as an inheritance waiting to be claimed. He thought about Adele saying she went to church because someone knew her name every week. He thought about Tasia saying her dad died and she'd told him about songs that didn't matter because she needed to say them anyway. He thought about Raymond Birch, school bus driver, $38,000 a year, 47 kids at his funeral. Connor Hale had been wrong about what success looked like. He had been wrong for a long time, and it had taken a hospital bed and a locked body and a night janitor with a mop bucket to show him. He needed to wake up, not for the company, not for the shares or the board or the filing. He needed to wake up because Adele Birch deserved to know that she had been heard, and Tanya deserved to know that her words had mattered, and Phoebe, his daughter, who had flown through the night and held his hand and said nothing about money, deserved to have her father back. But that night, when Adele came in, she was quieter than usual. She set up her bucket. She started on the far corner of the room. And after a while, she said without any preamble, "They're moving you, Mr. Hale. I overheard the charge nurse transferring you upstate, some long-term care facility, supposed to happen tomorrow." Connor felt cold. "I don't know if you can hear me. I've never known. But I wanted to tell you anyway." Her voice stayed steady, but the steadiness had the particular quality of someone working hard to maintain it. "I'm going to miss talking to you. I know that sounds strange. You've never said a word back to me. But," she stopped, wrung out the mop, started again. "Sometimes you just need a place to put your thoughts, and this room's has been that for me lately. So thank you for that, even if you never knew you were doing it." She finished the floor. She put the bucket aside. She pulled the chair close, the way she did at the end of every shift, and she sat. "Tanya wants me to tell you that she finished her entrepreneur project. She wrote about you. Not the magazine stuff. She said she could find that anywhere. She wrote about what I told her, about how you never forgot where you came from." A soft exhale. "I hope that's true. I hope that's really who you are." "I think it is. Feels like it is." She stood. "Goodbye, Mr. Hale. I'll pray for you. Raymond always said prayer was just talking to someone who already knows the answer. So maybe you'll be okay even when I'm not around to say goodnight." She walked toward the door. Connor focused. Everything he had. Every neuron that was still firing in the brain that had built 400 jobs and read 600 balance sheets and remembered the names of his employees' children. He aimed all of it at his right hand, the one that Phoebe had held, the one that Tanya had touched with her careful teenager fingers. Move, nothing. Move. A tremor. Barely. A single finger twitching against the bedsheet like a moth against a window. The heart monitor shifted. 3 quick beeps. Adele stopped. He pushed harder. He thought about Raymond Birch's 47 kids. He thought about Tanya writing a school report about a man she'd never met. He thought about 11 years of night shifts, and a loose front step that never got fixed, and a woman who kept showing up to talk to someone who, according to every machine in the room, couldn't hear her. His hand shifted, his wrist. His whole right arm moved against the sheet. "Oh!" Adele's voice broke in half. "Oh my, she was at the door in 2 steps. Nurse! I need a nurse in here, please." He's moving. Voices flooded the hallway. Feet running, the door swinging wide. Light suddenly pressing against his eyelids. Connor Hale opened his eyes. The ceiling was white. The lights were bright and hard. There was a nurse on his left and someone in scrubs on his right and a monitor alarming somewhere above his head. And in the doorway, with one hand pressed over her mouth, stood Adele Birch. Connor's throat burned. His voice had not worked in 8 days. It came out as barely a sound at all, cracked and thin like something dug up from dry earth. But it was enough. Adele. She made a sound he would remember for the rest of his life. Not a word, just a breath of relief so complete it was almost grief in reverse. The next 2 weeks were hard in the way that recoveries are always hard. Unglamorous, exhausting, measured in millimeters. Physical therapy at 6 in the morning. The indignity of relearning how to hold a cup. Speech sessions with a therapist who was kind but brisk and had 17 other patients on her list. Phoebe flew back out and stayed. She slept on the recliner in the corner of his room and made him eat the hospital jello when he complained, and didn't once mention the board or the shares or the attorneys. Derek came on the 10th day, stood in the doorway with Vivian and said, carefully, that he was glad his father was recovering, that there had been some concern. Connor looked at his son, really looked at him, the way you can only look at someone when you've had 8 days to think, and said nothing, not yet. There would be time for that conversation. There would have to be. The documents were voided. The power of attorney was never finalized. The Scottsdale deed question remained his to answer, not theirs. And on a Thursday afternoon, when the autumn light was coming through the window at the particular angle that makes everything look like a memory, Adele knocked on the open door. She was in her civvies, jeans, and a green sweater, her hair done differently than it was in her scrubs. She looked for a moment like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. "You don't have to knock," Connor said. His voice had mostly come back, though it still sounded rougher than before, like a road after she smiled, a real smile, the kind that rearranges a person's whole face. "Tanya wanted to come," she said, "but she had a math test." She said to tell you she expects you to read her essay about you. She gave herself an A- and says the messiness was the teacher being picky. Connor laughed. It hurt a little. He didn't mind. Sit down, Adele. She did. He looked at her for a moment. This woman in her green sweater and pulled up a chair and told him about Raymond and 47 kids at a funeral. This woman who had kept talking into a silence she had every reason to believe was permanent. This woman who had saved his life without touching a single machine. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. I heard everything. Every night. Every word. The expression that crossed her face was something between shock and something else. Something that looked, he thought, like vindication, like something she had believed against all evidence had just turned out to be true. I heard you talk about Raymond, he continued, about Tanya, about the church and the house and the loose front step. He stopped. I heard you say that the worst thing isn't dying. It's being in a room and not mattering to anyone in it. Adele was very still. You made sure I mattered, he said. When everyone else in that room was talking about what I owned, you were the only one talking to me. She looked down at her hands for a moment. Then back up. Raymond would have liked you, she said finally. He always liked people who came back from things. The Hale Family Foundation was announced 6 weeks later. It was not named after Connor, though people assumed it would be. It was structured specifically to support healthcare workers in underfunded hospitals, paid training, childcare subsidies, emergency funds for workers facing unexpected hardship. The first major initiative was a scholarship program for the children of hospital support staff, porters, aides, food service workers, night cleaning crews. It was called the Raymond Birch Fund. Connor did not make a speech at the announcement. He let the foundation's executive director handle the remarks. He stood in the back of the room with Phoebe on one side and Adele on the other, and Tanya in front of them in a dress she had clearly been persuaded into and was clearly regretting. And he thought about a man he had never met who drove a school bus for $38,000 a year and was worth 47 kids showing up to say goodbye. He thought about what it meant to live in a way that made people notice you were gone. His conversations with Derek were difficult and honest and long overdue. They did not fix everything. Some things cannot be fixed on a single afternoon. But they were real, and that was more than Connor could say for most of the conversations he'd had in the past 20 years. He fixed the front step at Adele's house on a Saturday in November. She told him he didn't have to. He told her it was already done. Tanya got an A on the revision of her essay. The teacher's note said, "Your subject clearly gave you more material to work with than most students have access to. Excellent personal insight." Connor framed it and put it on the wall in his office, next to the Forbes covers, where he could see it from his desk. Some people accumulate. Some people connect. Connor Hale had spent 61 years doing one and one night learning to do the other, and the only thing that surprised him in the end was how long it had taken a locked and silent room to show him which one actually mattered.